we're not even going to go through all of this stuff, but the next slide is a part of the regulations that were just issued by the U.S. Department of Labor last week. And these regulations, as all regulations do, they interpret the law. So when Congress passes a law, the law itself is rather short, and then it's the regulations that interpret the law and give meaning to the words of the law. And so on this slide, you can see all the various categories of regulation that were passed, implemented by the U.S. Department of Labor to interpret the actual law. And this deals with paid leave under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. All right, next slide.
Bruce, I may just interrupt you real quick. Anne, do you hear us now?
Hello, can you hear me? This is Anne.
Okay, yes, I just wanted to make sure, because I see that you are there and unmuted, so just wanted to make sure that you were able to hear us. Okay.
Yep.
Moving on to the next slide.
All right. So first of all, we have the Emergency Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act. And some people are already calling it FMLA, taking the first letter of each word there and abbreviating it. I like to call it the Expansion Family Medical Leave Act, but you can call it whatever you want. But at the end of the day, it is, as you see here on the screen where it says Section 3102, it's amendments to the Family and Medical Leave Act. So as many or most of you know, there's a law in the U.S. called the Family Medical Leave Act, where if you get sick and you need time off from work, you can have up to 12 weeks of time off from work if you work for an employer with 50 or more employees. So that's been the existing law. Congress passed an addition to that, or an expansion to that, and in that expansion, we've highlighted here, it goes only till December 31, 2002, and it only covers Family Medical Leave Act if a parent needs to take time off to be with their children who no longer have daycare or school available to them. And it provides for up to 12 weeks of paid leave at 2/3 of the rate of pay that the person was receiving at the employer. And this only applies to employers with under 500 employees. So if you work for a large company with more than 500 employees, this doesn't even apply. If you work for an employer with less than 500 employees, then you're covered by this new Family Medical Leave Expansion Act, and it applies to employers of any size. So this is something new for small employers, because the regular Family Medical Leave Act only applies if the employer has more than 50 employees. Next slide. Along with that, and we're still under the law that was passed by Congress called the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, we have the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act. Now, this is the big one, because this provides paid sick leave to anybody that works for an employer with less than 500 employees, as long as they qualify under one of 6 categories that you see highlighted here. And it's either full salary, or it's 2/3 of your salary, depending on what category you're eligible under. But if you take a look, it covers anybody, paid sick leave, if you have any sort of symptoms of coronavirus and you have plans to go see a doctor. So anybody with a cold, maybe allergies to pollen this time of year, or anything like that, can get the paid sick leave under this particular law, and it applies to the smallest employers. We're going to talk in a little bit about some exceptions to that, because I've had employers come to me and say, oh, but there's an exception. It doesn't apply to me. But I don't even know if you want to take the exception, assuming you've got the money to pay the employees. Because if an employer has the money to pay the employees, under this Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act, they get credits on their payroll taxes. In fact, I think I saw one thing that said they don't even need to submit payroll taxes for that particular employee. This might be a good time to pass the baton over to Ann. And maybe, Ann, you can explain that if an employer is making these Paid Sick Leave Act payments to an employee, what sort of tax benefits are they getting, and can they withhold or get credit for the payroll taxes? How does that work?
Yes, hello, this is Ann. There is a payroll tax credit refund, and that credit is required for paid sick leave and the family leave. And you can get a refund in advance using forms that have been provided by the IRS. So you would have to file the forms to get this refund, but you can get it ahead of time.
Okay, because I had just gotten something from my payroll processor, which is Paychex, because I'm an employer myself, and they were talking about how they're going to process payroll now, and they've got it all set up. And I thought I had seen something in the act that said you don't even need to submit the payroll taxes as you're doing these payrolls. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's different. There's a payroll tax delay, and that delay means that the payments for 2020 employer payroll taxes, for 50% of those taxes will be delayed until December 31st, 2021, and the other 50% will be due not until December 31st, 2022.
Okay.
So yeah, that is correct.
All right. Can we see the next slide, please? Okay, so this is what I was talking about under the expanded FMLA. It provides for if a worker is taking off because they don't have childcare, because school is out, or because their daycare is closed, they're entitled to 2 weeks of, well, this says paid sick leave. Actually, under the FMLA expansion version, it says unpaid sick leave. But they can get the paid sick leave under the separate Paid Sick Leave Act, which is good for 2 weeks. So essentially, they can get up to 12 weeks. And small employers are covered. In fact, it only applies to small employers under 500 employees. And with regard to how employers can afford this, hopefully they've got the money in their bank accounts to afford it. But if they can't, then under the regulations, and maybe this is a good time to talk about it, under the regulations that have come out from the Department of Labor, there was an exception if it's going to cause great harm to the business, basically put the business out of business by allowing for paid sick leave. And so the Department of Labor came out with this exception. It applies if you have under 50 employees, and it applies to both regular businesses. It applies to religious organizations, nonprofit organizations as well. And if it would jeopardize the validity of the business, or if it would result in the small business's expenses and financial obligations exceeding the revenue, or if it would entail a substantial risk to the financial health or operational capabilities of the business because of that employee's specialized skills, the employer is not employee from coverage. They have to give notice to the Department of Labor, which of course is going to invite an audit. So any employer that's trying to claim an exemption from the paid sick leave is really opening the door to a Department of Labor investigation, or even worse, a lawsuit. So they should really think twice about trying to get that exemption of not paying the paid sick leave, unless it's just crystal clear that they just have no funds in the bank to do it. But short of that, I mean, you could look at the regulation, and the way it's written doesn't require a whole lot. It just requires a certification by the employer of any of these things that I just described. And probably the easiest one is that either A, there's no funds to pay paid sick leave, or B, the employee is more or less an essential worker to the business. And that would allow for the exemption. But as I said, it opens the door to a lawsuit. It opens the door to a Department of Labor investigation. Next slide, please. So an employee who's unable to work because of coronavirus, quarantine, self-quarantine, seeking a medical diagnosis, they're entitled to the 80 hours of sick pay. And there's a limitation on how much they can collect, isn't that right?
Yes, it's limited to 80 hours, 10 days or 80 hours.
Okay, and then there's certain specific financial limitations, which in this slide is $511 per day, not more than $51.10 in total. Go to the next slide, please. I saw there was a question being asked, and it says, with regard to the taxes, one of our listeners asked the question, so the taxes are only going to be delayed, but not forgiven with regard to the payroll taxes. What's your understanding of that so far?
Yes, the payroll tax delay, there's three, basically there are three different credits. There's the payroll tax delay, and that's just the 2020 payroll taxes that are going to be delayed as of right now. Then on top of that, you have the payroll tax credit refund, and that's required for paid sick leave. And that is actually money coming back into your pocket. And then you have the employee retention credit, which is for employers that are allowed to credit against their employment taxes equal to 50% of the wages up to $10,000. So it is and we're also expecting more to come out because quite frankly, small businesses needed to retain their employees. But yeah, the payroll tax delay is for 2020 payroll taxes, and that is so far only being delayed. But you can also apply for the payroll tax credit refund and the employee retention credits.
Okay. We can go to the next slide, Alicia. Care for children due to daycare or school closure. I think I already talked about that. You can get up to $10,000 if you're on the paid leave because of that reason. Next slide, Alicia. And before we get to this, let me just mention it was an interesting article today in the Wall Street Journal that talked about some of the strategies that large companies are using by furloughing their employees. You've heard this new magic word, furlough. And companies have allowed the employees to keep their benefits. And they highlighted big employers such as Macy's, which we have right in South Beach, which I believe is closed right now, because all the employees are getting so-called furloughs, meaning they're off of work, they're eligible for unemployment if they've been furloughed, which is really interesting. And the employers have more or less promised to take them back once all of this is over. So there's another law out there that says that if you get furloughed, well, it's interesting how all these laws work together. So the regulations say that you have to be available for work and the employer has work for you before you can take sick leave. So you have to be actively employed. So what happens if you're furloughed? If you're furloughed, you can't take sick leave because you're no longer employed. And that's where this other safety net comes into play. You may have heard that there's an additional $600 per week of unemployment that's available for anybody that's getting unemployment because they've been furloughed or laid off due to coronavirus. So not only will you get the money that you would normally get from your state unemployment agency, which typically is not much, a couple $100 a week, but you get $600 a week added on by the federal government in some separate legislation. And that was the article in this morning's Wall Street Journal as companies try to strategize what to do, and not just companies, but employees try to strategize. An employee may say to the employer, will you go ahead and furlough me? Lay me off now. You know, I don't want to collect the $10 an hour you're paying me. I'd rather get the $600 a week, which is $15 an hour that the federal government's going to pay me, in addition to what the state is paying me for the unemployment. So both employers and employees have the ability to strategize here. And even if an employee gets terminated, they're still eligible for unemployment, unless it's a termination for cause. If it's a termination for cause, then there's all sorts of issues that deal with whether you're entitled to unemployment in the first place. Well, let me turn it over to Ann now, and she could talk about the payroll tax credit and everything under that.
Hello, this is Ann. Yeah, I think we have pretty much gone over them already. While Bruce was talking about the law, we also talked about the credits that are available. I wanted to touch on the employee retention credit one more time. This relates to businesses that are fully or partially suspended by the government due to COVID-19 during the calendar quarters. And the employees' gross receipts are below 50% compared to the last quarter in 2019. So if you are significant, for example, all the restaurants that are now just doing takeout instead of having service, their revenue is most likely down, and they can get the credit for this retention credit, as long as they're still paying, like the cooks and what have you that are still making the food for the takeout. And there is a long calculation that goes into it, but it is a fairly good credit. We talked about the payroll tax delay and the maximum payment allowed to each employee. Bruce talked about the additional $600 that you can get in unemployment. And I know that a lot of people here in Florida have been trying to apply for it, and the system was down, and they are working to get the Florida page back up again, so you can apply electronically to get the state unemployment, and then that will also lead to the federal $600 per week unemployment. That would be in the same application. And I think we can go to the next credit, unless you wanted to add something, Bruce?
No, go to the next slide.
Okay, so the payroll protection program has been in full force. I've submitted several backup documentations to my clients so that they can apply. What it is it's a loan that is designed to provide a direct incentive for small businesses to keep their workers on the payroll. And if you keep your workers on the payroll and you use the loan that you're given to pay for their payroll, at least 75% of the loan should go to payroll, then the loan will actually be forgiven. So we recommend all small businesses impacted to apply for this program. You have to apply through an existing SBA lender. Typically, you would use your bank. So you would go to whoever your business bank is and go to their website. They should have an electronic application. The application is very short. They made it very, very efficient to apply for. What is cumbersome is the support documentation that you have to give the bank. So a bank, who qualifies? Any small business with 500 employees or less qualifies. They also made new provisions for sole proprietors, independent contractors, and self-employed people. So right now, the applications are open for small businesses under 500. Starting this Friday, there will be a new application for independent contractors and self-employed people where they can apply. And with that, they also, if you apply as a business, you can use W-2, meaning people who are on salary, but you're also allowed to use people that are on 1099s, meaning they're contractors, but you are paying them, and then you issue them 1099s at the year end. You can also use that when you calculate the loan that you will be given. There are a couple of caps. Employees are paid more than $100,000. There's a cap at $100,000, so their monthly payroll is capped at 8,333 when you do the calculation. Let me see here. So as I said, the loan will be fully forgiven if it's used for payroll costs at 75%, and then the other 25% you could use to pay for your rent or your mortgage or utilities, and it will still be forgiven at that point. If you use the money for something else, the loan has a maturity of 2 years and an interest rate of 1%. And the way you calculate the loan is you have to come up with the average of your monthly payroll. So you look at 2019, you can look at January, February of 2020 and see what you paid for your monthly payroll, including W-2s and 1099s. And once you come up with that 1 month payroll, you get to multiply that by 2.5, and the result is the loan that you would be eligible for. And there's a specific clause for realtors and for waitresses, bartenders, etc., where they can use their commission or tips when calculating the loan available for them. Anything you want to add here, Bruce?
No, I can't wait to sign up. And I know my favorite accountant, Ann McCowan, will give me all the documents I need to support that application. So thanks, Ann.
Yeah, that is correct.
The next slide.
Okay, yeah, next slide. Okay, so there's also an emergency loan available. It's called Economic Injury Disaster Loan. That's a loan that you can apply for. I believe it's 3.5% interest, but in addition to that, they added a loan advance. And this loan advance is a $10,000 loan that can also be forgiven. So here you don't go to your bank. It is also through the Small Business Administration, but you don't go to your bank. Here you actually go and apply on the SBA.gov webpage, and you fill in your information. It's also a very, very short application. You need to know what your total revenue was in 2019 and what your revenue was in January and February. And depending on what type of business you are, you also need to know your cost of goods sold. And this is open for for-profit and for not-for-profit as well. Let me see here. It's also certain industries, and I think that's applied to restaurants, you can have more than 500 employees, but otherwise it's the similar rules where you have to be a business with less than 500 employees. And so this loan was supposed to be available in 3 to 4 days after you applied. So far, I've had several people apply for this, and no one has received any money yet. But it is because the SBA is clogged up. You know, they're getting so many applications. They have given, I think, that quadruple their applications that they're getting right now compared to what they get over a whole year. So they are working diligently, but so far I haven't seen any money come out. But we do recommend that you go and apply for this economic relief as well if you're a small business that's impacted by the coronavirus. Bruce?
Next slide. Okay. Here's one that you probably never heard about. Are you aware that every employer must post this particular notice, employee rights? Every employer, especially if you have under 500 employees, this notice must be posted. It's available on the U.S. Department of Labor website, and you need to go ahead and print it out and post it in a conspicuous place where you have other announcements about workers' comp and unemployment and things of that nature, but absolutely critical. The law and the regulations both require all employers must post this notice. And it's really a great little poster because it covers everything we have talked about with regard to paid sick leave, and your rights under the FMLA or your responsibilities under the FMLA. It's got everything on one page there. And at the bottom where it says enforcement, you've got the U.S. Department of Labor warning employers that they're going to go ahead and enforce this stuff. One of the scary things is that it says that enforcement is under the FLSA, the Fair Labor Standards Act. Scary for employers, that is that enforcement's under the FLSA, and the FLSA provides for attorney's fees. So you may have a dispute with an employee whether you need to pay them 2/3 of their salary for 2 weeks of paid leave. And if you don't pay them because you're claiming you're exempt, they may go get an attorney that handles these wage and hour claims, overtime all the time, and they'll file a lawsuit over 2 weeks of paid leave, and the employer could be responsible for all the attorney's fees. So just another reason why employers should try to shy away from the exception to paying employees and to take advantage of all the programs that Ann just described, the emergency loan, the other loan to pay wages and pay mortgage and pay rent. Take advantage of that if you're in a financial situation as an employer and you can't afford to pay, because there's some potentially very serious repercussions. And for those of you that run a business, you already know that if an employee brings an overtime claim, that's the least of your worries. It's the attorney's fees that's the big problem, and the courts pretty much will always award attorney's fees. So for a claim of 2 weeks of pay, you could be looking at $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 in lawyer fees for prosecuting that case. So that's a pretty serious matter. Another thing that I've heard from people is, I don't qualify for the paid leave. I'm just afraid to go to work, and I don't have coronavirus. I don't have any symptoms, but my employer is insisting I go to work, and I'm afraid to go to work because I'm afraid I might get the coronavirus. Well, there's old laws that deal with that. So for many years, people come to me, and for whatever reason, they don't want to go to work. The employer is insisting they must work. They must work extra hours, get the overtime, but they want to be with their families. So how does an employee get off? Well, there's still a law called the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and that particular law allows an employee to have time off if they have a disability. So, if somebody is suffering post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of coronavirus situation, they're suffering depression, or they actually have some sort of physical injury, they could get a letter from a doctor that orders them to take time off from work. And that law, the Americans with Disabilities Act, does not apply to the smallest employers, but it doesn't apply to employers with 15 or more employees. So if an individual works for a company with more than 15 employees, and the employer is insisting that they come to work even during mandatory lockdowns or shelter-in-place orders, they can still manage to get off under the ADA if they have a letter from their employer. Now, this is not a letter from their doctor ordering them off. Now, this does not guarantee the employer they're not going to get fired. I mean, the employer might still fire you for not showing up, but it does give the employee a legal claim. We're getting towards the end of our slides here, but one that we did not have a slide on that I thought is really interesting, because I have some clients and friends that are physicians and nurses who are on the front lines of this that have told me all sorts of crazy stories, like they're not allowed to wear a mask to protect themselves, or only a certain type of mask, and they can't wear full covering, and they can't wear goggles, but they can wear a mask. Anyway, all sorts of issues. Unfortunately for healthcare workers and first responders, they are pretty much accepted, meaning they're not really covered by any of this paid sick leave, FMLA, or anything under these new laws. And it's not only for doctors, nurses, and physicians and hospitals, doctors, nurses, and hospitals, but it's for lots of other people that do business with doctors, hospitals, and nurses. So let me read you the list from the regulations. Who else is exempted from this paid leave? How about post-secondary educational institutions offering healthcare instruction. Medical schools, if you work at a medical school, you're precluded from participating in this paid sick leave law. Retirement facilities, people that work at nursing homes, people that do home health care, or any facility that performs lab or medical testing, or pharmacies. That's right. If you work at CVS or Walgreens, the regulations say you're not covered by this paid sick leave. It's specifically in the regulations. So that is certainly of some concern. That's not to say that if you work at CVS or Walgreens, they won't give you the paid sick leave. I mean, you could ask. But right in here, it says pharmacies are exempted under healthcare providers from having the paid sick leave available to their employees. And this applies also if you've got the child care situation. If you've got children that are out of school and you want to be home with them, your employer can say you're not covered by this particular law if they're a pharmacy or somehow related to healthcare. Anne, is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I think you've done a great job covering.
Let me see whether our next slide is. We may be almost at the end here.
Yeah.
Questions?
There's a question for you, yeah.
Yeah, it looks like we've got some. Let's see. Well, there's one about the EIDL.
Yes, I responded to that one. And yeah, but I can read it. Yeah. So the question was, does it apply to independent contractors? And yes, it does. The program is for any small business with less than 500 employees, including sole proprietor, independent contractors, and self-employed person.
Okay, we have one other question here. Does the paid leave apply to the furloughed employees and if they get sick after? So once you've been furloughed, you're technically no longer an employee. And the regulations, because this was a very good question, because the way the law is written, it wasn't clear whether furloughed employees are covered by the paid sick leave or not. But the regulations made it very specific. And they said that if there is no work for you, that is furloughed employees, there's no work for you, then you are not covered by this paid sick leave act. What you are covered under is unemployment. So any furloughed employees can apply for unemployment. And as I said earlier, that's a huge benefit because not only are you getting the usual state unemployment of a couple $100s a week, but on top of that, you should automatically be getting the additional $600 a week. And Anne, you mentioned something earlier. There's something on the unemployment form about that. Was that right?
On the unemployment form?
Yeah, if you know anything about the unemployment and the $600 per week.
Well, you have to go through your state website. So Florida, you have to go to florida.gov to apply for unemployment. And then on that same application, you will be able to apply for the additional $600.
All right, so there you go.
Yeah.
So anyone who's been furloughed is entitled to that. And that's what I mentioned earlier. It's on the front page of today's Wall Street Journal. You can probably look at it online. And that specifically talks about this situation. And the regulations, as I said, specifically talk about it as well. If you're furloughed, meaning there's no work for you, you are not covered by the paid sick leave laws. So that's very, very important. The other question was, what if you're a furloughed employee and you get sick? Same thing. Furloughed means you're no longer there, and your only option is to get the unemployment together with the federal benefit of $600 extra per week. So that's several $1,000s a month right there. Anything else you'd like to add, Ann?
No, I'm good. Any more questions?
It doesn't look like we have any more questions.
I just have a short question. When you apply to the unemployment through your state, and you said that you can, in that same application, you can request the $600. What is it actually called? Is that like the federal assistance? What is that? What's the actual name of those $600 assistance?
That's question, Alicia, and unless Ann knows, I certainly don't know the answer to that. I know that that was part of a specific law that was passed, but it's not the laws that we're talking about today. It's a separate law that got passed. But I think it's pretty much automatic, and it's going to be automatic based on your date of termination and based on you receiving the unemployment from the state. But I'm sure there'll be information on the state website for unemployment. Here in Florida, that's called the Florida Office of Economic Opportunity. You would go to their website, and for all my friends, clients, colleagues in Texas, that's called the Texas Workforce Commission. And those are the two applicable unemployment offices for those two states. But like Ann said, they're under a tremendous workload right now. And I don't even know, and from what I've heard and read, the websites are being like slammed down because they can't even handle all the traffic that they're getting. But I think once they get their IT things taken care of and they're back online, they'll be able to process all of this, and all the furloughed, laid off workers will be able to get the 200 plus that they get every week, plus the 600 additional federal benefit, and that's good for up to 4 months. And yes, Alicia, it's a law, but it's not one of the laws that were covered by what we were talking about today. It's a separate law, and I don't know the name of it.
Thank you, Bruce. That's helpful, though.
Great. Are there any other questions?
I have a quick question. How would it work if an employee has already been accepted for unemployment and the employer is being charged for the unemployment benefits, and then the employer gets approved for the PPP?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Ann, do you want to talk about the PPP at all?
Yeah. So you may still get the loan, even though you have an employee that's already been approved for employment. However, the loan may not be forgiven, because what it says is that you have to retain, I want to say 75% of your payroll for the loan to be forgiven. So if you don't retain the employees and your payroll goes down by more than 25%, then the loan may not be forgiven.
Also, what you might have been implying, because I'm an employer as well, and I've got 15 or 16 employees, is the employer going to take a hit on their unemployment because they have all these people filing for unemployment? And I have not seen any guidance on that yet. As you probably know, there's guidance coming out on almost a daily basis about this stuff. But if the government is looking to help small employers, then giving them some huge hit on their unemployment insurance rate at the end of the year because of all these unemployment claims is not really going to be helping employers. So unless it's covered by some obscure provision of one of the laws that has passed so far, and I haven't seen it, that's not to say it's not there, I would certainly seem to think that there's going to be something coming out that will cap the unemployment insurance rate for small employers, so they don't get hit with some crazy unemployment insurance rate for the next year based on all these high unemployment claims. Are there any other questions from anybody else in the listening audience? All right, well, if there's no other questions, the contact information for Ann and I is on the screen here. Both of our emails are there, and I think I can speak for Ann that we both welcome emails. Feel free to email us if you think of any other questions, and we will continue to digest additional regulations and guidance from the various government agencies that are coming out with guidance based on the particular law and the regulations that I've posted here for you this morning. So thank you all for listening in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.
Right, thank you.